Shalom, the Torah portion this week is a fascinating Torah portion that talks about the instruction regarding the construction of the tabernacle of the Mishkan, the temporary structure that was the central gathering place for the Jewish people as they journeyed through the desert for the 40 years while they were in the desert and continued to be with them in the Promised Land for hundreds of years until they were able to build the permanent structure, the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple itself. This Mishkan was designed in the most fascinating, beautiful way, with the most artistic and aesthetic manner, with beauty of gold, silver, different materials, colors, and so on and so forth. What's interesting about the Torah portion that stands out is the fact that all of these instructions were given by Moses to those that were working on the Mishkan and to the Jewish people who helped contribute towards the Mishkan. Yet, Moses himself, his name is not mentioned in this Torah portion. In fact, it is the only Torah portion from the time that Moses is born and introduced to us in the beginning of the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, all the way until he passes away in the end of the Torah, in the portion of V'zot HaBracha. It is the only Torah portion that his name is not mentioned. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is because of the events that we're going to read about in next week's Torah portion, which is the sin of the golden calf, which briefly, to recap what happened in that story, was after the revelation of Mount Sinai, Moses goes up to receive the engraved set of 10 commandments and comes down 40 days later to present those luchot, the tablets with the engraved commandments. And as he comes down, he sees the Jewish people are worshiping the golden calf. At which point he throws down the 10 commandments and breaks them, as the famous details of this story are known to so many. What happens at this moment is God is angry with the Jewish people and wants to wipe out the entire Jewish people. And Moses, as a true leader and defender of the Jewish people, turns to God and says, if you cannot forgive the Jewish people, then erase my name, erase me from the entire Torah. And even though God did actually forgive the Jewish people, the fact that Moshe made this statement that his name should be erased was fulfilled in at least a small manner by having his name removed from this week's Torah portion, where his name is not mentioned at all. But what's odd about this is that this is a Torah portion that's before this event actually happens. And the question is, why is his name missing from this Torah portion? One of the interesting ways to explain this is the fact that in this week, when we read this Torah portion, we actually commemorate the passing of Moses. On the 7th of Adar, which was just a couple of days ago, was the day that Moses passed away. And to reflect that event, his name is missing from the Torah portion. Now, the truth of the matter is, Judaism has a very interesting perspective on what happens when a person passes away. And it would be incorrect to come to the conclusion that the person disappears, that their soul no longer exists. On the contrary, we know that the soul continues to exist. And not only that, we know that the day of birth actually supersedes the day of passing, as we see in the story of Purim, which is coming up next week. We find that when Haman made the lottery to decide when he was going to put in place his horrible decree to wipe out the Jewish people, his lottery came up with the month of Adar, which is the month we're in right now. And he thought how perfect this would be. This seems to be so in line with what we know happened historically in the Jewish community, in Jewish history, which is the passing of Moses. So Haman comes to the conclusion that this month is the right month to annihilate the Jewish people because Moses has passed away. What he didn't know, says the Talmud, is that Moses was also born on this day as well. Moses lived exactly 120 years and passed away on the day that he was born. And what Haman miscalculated was that in Judaism, the day of birth is greater than the day of passing. And he didn't realize that really the mazel, the good fortune of the Jewish people was actually stronger in this month, which is what we see unfolding in the story of Purim and how they overcame all the challenges and all the decrees that were put upon them. But what this does is leaves us with a question. If this is indeed correct, that the day of birth is greater, how is it that the Torah portion that we read this week has Moses' name absent, seemingly to commemorate the fact that he passed away, leaving us with the absence of Moses rather than the presence of Moses? So what's interesting is, if we look more closely at the opening words of the Torah portion, it actually begins with the words Va'ata tetzaveh, which means, and you shall command. God is talking to Moses and he's referring to him in the most direct way, and you shall instruct the Jewish people the following instructions regarding the tabernacle. When you use the word you, there's only one context in which that makes sense: when the person is right there in front of you. A name, on the other hand, can be used when the person is far away and you're just speaking about them or referring to them. You, on the other hand, requires it to be in a state, in a situation where the person is right there. So indeed, the Torah portion is actually reflecting the exact idea that we say about the fact that birth, even though happens before death, birth actually supersedes death. And death isn't a cancellation of that person's life, but it is just a new phase, a new stage in the journey of that soul that was now down here and then goes up above. As the Rebbe once told a colleague of mine, when his father passed away, he said, think of your relationship as you are in the house of a two-story building, and you're sitting on the main floor, but your father is upstairs on the second floor. And this is the way Judaism looks at passing as well. When a soul passes away, it doesn't disappear, it doesn't go away, it goes to a different level, but is still very much aware, very much connected to the loved ones, and the loved ones can very much connect and bring happiness and nachas to the loved one that has passed as well. And this is what we see in this week's Torah portion. On one hand, Moses' name is absent because of his passing, but in a greater way, his essence is present because of his birth, because of his true dedication to the Jewish people and to advancing Jewish beliefs and Jewish teachings. There's a Chassidic teaching that also says and explains why the Torah tells us that no one knows where Moses is buried. And it says, I believe it's the name of Reb Nachum of Chernobyl, who says that the reason why we don't know where Moses is buried is because Moses is not buried. Moses continues to live through each and every one of us. We all have a little bit of Moses in us. And just like Moses' soul is eternal, so too there's an eternity to our soul that supersedes anything else that may follow, and everything else is only part of the journey, but not an ending of that journey. To connect this a little bit to the story of Purim, we find a very similar pattern where the Megillah is a fascinating story and navigation of the trials and tribulations of the Jewish people who eventually emerged victorious and survived all the challenges of that story. But God's name is not mentioned in the entire Megillah, which is quite fascinating. You have this amazing story of miraculous survival, yet the name of God is not mentioned. And what we are told is that the explanation is similar to the explanation of why Moses' name is not mentioned. It's true that God's name isn't mentioned, meaning God's presence is not there in a revealed way, but God is there in the story of Purim, behind the scenes, animating and activating all those events that occurred that resulted in the survival of the Jewish people. And this is in contrast to other miracles and other holidays throughout the year, Passover, Hanukkah, where the miracles are very much in the open and obvious and defy natural order. The story of Purim is different in the sense that the miracle is concealed within the natural order. It's still God navigating, it's still God animating. It's like the hand that is moving inside the glove. No one will say, oh, look how beautifully that glove moves with such synchronicity, with such dexterity. Obviously, it's only the hand that's in that glove that is causing the glove to move. Similarly, we look at nature and the order of the universe as the glove, the facade, the external layer of reality that is being animated and controlled by the miraculous divine force of God Himself. So the story of Purim, in many ways, is the story of our lives. We're not necessarily in a time right now where we see miracles every day. We don't see the biblical scale of miracles like we saw in those days. But we are in the story of Purim, and we continue that perspective and live with that perspective, recognizing that even though life looks like it is flowing in a very natural, orderly, nature kind of way, there is a divine energy that is animating that and causing that to happen. And God is hidden in that process, not because He doesn't want us to see Him, but because there's a certain beauty to seeking that relationship out. When a miracle happens, the drama is a wow impact, has a very amazing awakening to us in that moment. But when it's hidden and concealed and we have to seek it out, there's a certain suspense, there's a certain yearning, there's a certain engagement that we find ourselves in pursuing that deep, loving relationship with God. So while other miracles and other holidays are a time where God comes out of hiding, so to speak, and reveals Himself to us, this is the kind of miracle where we seek it out and meet God and express our deep desire to understand and connect and fill our lives with that relationship with God Himself. So as we celebrate Purim, as we read the Torah portion this week, let's be reminded that what we don't see on the surface is because there's something hiding beneath the surface. Or as I like to put it, this phrase, missing in action. When something is missing, it's because it's in action behind the scene. When God's name is missing, it's because He's actively working behind the scene to orchestrate the good outcomes that we hope and pray for. When Moses' name is missing, or when a loved one's presence is missing, it's very often an indication that they are on a higher level, in working in a disguised manner to bring about the blessings that we hope and wish upon ourselves. And this is also an added explanation as to why we cover our faces and masquerade and dress up on Purim, to remind ourselves that what we see on the surface is only just that. It's the surface, it's external. There's always a layer beneath, and sometimes what's beneath is even more powerful than what is on the surface. Where we search, and may we find that connection, find that relationship. It is there waiting for us to claim it. Shabbat Shalom and happy Purim.